Hello. Today we're going to be working on a little bit of a specific request, which is how to get inventory items connected up to widgets. And let me show you first how it works. I'm going to press 9 here. And these two are inventory items that the player has. And if I click gun, we are equipping gun. If we click katana, we are equipping katana. What I'm going to show is a super basic, high level way of actually doing this. So this equip function is just printing out a string. Nothing's actually really happening, but I'll show you where you would actually put in your own code. And if I press 9 again, then it's going to go away and you can do whatever. So the first thing that I always like to start out with is, let's go into paint. That's for later. And let's talk about, from yesterday, let's talk about how I think about this problem. Let's come up with the blocks that we have. We have the player character, the player controller, widgets, inventory, and items. These are all pieces that are going to be needed for this feature. The reason why I have player controller is because I know that the widgets are going to be contained within the player controller somehow. That's how I want them to be used. Technically, you can spawn widgets wherever, but the widgets are attached to player controllers, so that's kind of where I want them to be. Now, the player character is here because I want the inventory to be on the player character. And items are obviously, your inventory needs some amount of items. Let's talk about what this inventory is going to be. The simplest thing is to put the inventory inside the player character and just have an array in the player character and a bunch of functions in order to change up that inventory in some way, to do equipping, to remove items, to do whatever. I do not like doing this because it clogs up the player character. Say you have the inventory, then you're going to have other features and other features, and it's going to be just a huge pain to sift through all that code. Another thing is, especially with this, there are a lot of different characters in games that need inventory. Your enemies probably are going to need some amount of inventory, so I don't actually want the player character to have all the code. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the inventory into a component, which means that I can place this component on the player character or on anything else that I want to. And it's also going to make it easy to grab information from this inventory, like the items that we have. So we said that we want the widgets on the player controller. The player controller is going to control that. And then the player character here is going to have the inventory. And we need to find, the main problem with this whole feature is figuring out a way to connect the widgets to the specific items. And the way that this happens is there's a nifty node in widgets called get owning player character or get owning player period. And we're just going to use get owning player character in order to get the player character and then get the inventory component, and then this inventory component has all the items. So that's how, through this chain from widgets to player character to inventory to items, is how the widgets actually get a reference to these items. Now, let's actually walk through all that. First, let's create our items. This is a actor class, and this is going to be super simple. I've created a thumbnail for just whatever image and a name, katana or gun, and I put this under a config category. For me, I like to put everything that is, that you're going to want to mess around with under a config category. It just makes it easier for me, and just for organization's sake, I can go here under class defaults and easily change whatever I want. So we've created our item. Now we need specific items. So I right click this, create child blueprint class, and I created BP Katana and BP Gun. And the only thing that's different between these two is up here in the config section, I've changed out the thumbnail and the name. The katana has katana, and the gun has gun. And I chose random thumbnails because I don't have anything right now. And that's actually completely it for the item. Obviously, you're gonna want to put your own mesh, your own functions for your own whatever onto these items, but uh, I'm not worrying about that right now. I'm not creating a whole inventory system with this tutorial. Right now I'm just showing you how to connect the items to the widgets. Now let's talk about the inventory component. So again, this is a component because I can just drop it onto the player character easily. Actually, I can just show you right now. See, I clicked add component and I dropped that inventory component on there. I have a few variables here, inventory items to spawn, and this I have actually set to expose on spawn, and I'll tell you why in a second. This is going to be an array of BP items, and I've made it an array of class references because we are going to spawn these items from their classes. And the reason that I have expose on spawn here is, say on the player character I want to spawn both the BP gun and the BP katana in their inventory, but say on the enemy I only want them to have katanas. I can actually remove that inventory item entirely and it won't affect the player at all. But for this purpose, we're going to have them both. Back to inventory component. Sorry, I've been in this spawn inventory tab function when I should be showing you the event graph. The event graph is super simple. On begin play, we are going to spawn inventory items. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through our inventory items to spawn and actually just spawn them. It doesn't really matter, well, it does matter where you spawn them, but I'm going to leave that up to y'all. I'm just spawning them where the owner of this actor component is, and the owner of this actor component is the character. And owner and instigator, I'm setting to the owner and instigator of this actor component, which is going to be again the player character. So you'll see that I have to cast a pawn for instigator because instigator is a pawn object reference. If you cast to pawn normally, you're going to have this node with execution pins. If I right click this, then I can convert to pure cast. The problem normally with this is if you don't check this, this can return null pointer. Say your component is actually not on a pawn for some reason, it's just on some random actor. This is going to return null pointer. And when that happens, if you try to call a function like, whatever is locally viewed, it's actually going to crash. This, since your pawn is null pointer, you can't call functions on a null pointer. But in this case, we're not actually calling any functions on it. We're using it as a parameter. And in this case, if the instigator is not a pawn, then it needs to be null pointer anyways. So it's actually good that in this case it's going to return null pointer because we want it to be null pointer if the instigator is not a pawn. So we're spawning the actor, which is the inventory item, and we are adding that inventory item to this variable that I created for inventory items. I actually don't think that I ended up needing this. Oh wait, I do use it later. Actually, here, I'll show you. If I try to delete this, it's actually gonna yell at me because it's gonna tell me that it's in use, and it's in use in one of the widgets. And then here we do this very fancy thing called using event dispatchers. When you use an event dispatcher, in this inventory component, I'm basically just calling out to the world saying, hey, my inventory has changed. And anyone that wants to listen to it and do something with that information can do it. And in the widgets, when your inventory changes, you want more widgets to pop up. This is going to be important for at the very start when you've create your inventory, you want to then populate the widgets. And again, this is just broadcasting out to the world. Anything that wants to bind to it, that wants to listen to it, can do it. This is especially, just event dispatchers in general are great for saying, hey, I do something, now something else needs to do something in response to that first thing doing something. And I'll show you how that all works in just a second. I think that's the entirety of our inventory, actually. Super simple, just a list of inventory items to spawn that are then spawned and put onto the player character. The next thing is going to be the most complicated section of this, which is going to be our widgets. Here, I've created a widget. I think that I can just right click and do widget. Yes, widget blueprint. And then I clicked user widget and I called it inventory selection. I put in a canvas panel. It's not great practice to always put canvas panels on widgets. It can be not very performant, but in this case I want something to easily be able to drag around my widget, so it's one canvas panel. Don't attack me. And then I'll talk about the scale box in a second, but the most important thing is this list view, and we're actually going to go back to Paint to talk about list views because they're a little bit confusing. This here, the entry widget class is going to be the most important thing. Let's go back to Paint. So a list view is just a list of widgets, and in order to show information on these widgets, they have to be, they don't have to be, but they're usually attached to some item. So for our case, this list view is going to have a list of entry widgets, and as you can see here, that's how it's set up, and you can actually preview different number of entry widgets. And then you'll see that mine is already set up, and I'll show you how to set that up in a second. What we want to do is we want our entry widget to have information from the inventory item. So how I'm setting it up is this image is going to be grabbed from the gun or the katana. The text is going to be, again, grabbed from the gun or katana. I'm showing it this way, but in reality, the list view actually is the thing that is containing these items and then tells the widgets that this item was just set to them, and they should do whatever they want with that information. In our case, set the image and text. So let's go through that. Item list view. In our event graph, all we need to do is on construct. We'll talk about this right now, but in on construct, we want to add the inventory that has been spawned to our list view. This is where the event dispatcher comes in, and you might be asking, like, why not just ignore this and just add inventory to list? You know, grab the inventory from that inventory component and add it to our list view. The problem is that begin play and event construct, they're not, I think in this case they actually might be guaranteed to play in a certain order, but in general they won't be. There's nothing saying that this event construct in this widget must happen after the inventory is already spawned. So let me pose it as a question. Say that your inventory hasn't been spawned yet. What do you do right now? Because your widget's being constructed, what items do you put into your list? And then how do you get the list items once the inventory items do actually spawn? That's where this event dispatcher comes in. So at the point that our inventory component here says, hey, our inventory has changed, we call this event. And this event, I am using a create event node, and I'm just attaching it to the add inventory to list. You can also just do add custom event and do your code from there. Um, but again, what we're saying is when the inventory changes, add the inventory to the list. But your inventory might have actually already been created. So if it's already been created, this is never going to be called because it already released its message out. It happened before we could even listen for it. So we just immediately go for add inventory to list. And if it's empty, then you can actually see here um, in the in the code, if it's empty, it's just not going to do anything because the for each loop is going to be size 0. So going through each individual node, get owning player pawn is a function of the user widget, and that is what I mentioned way back earlier. It's going to get a reference to our player character, and from here we can do this thing that I love doing, get component by class, and it's going to get our AC inventory component. And you actually have to select all that. Select get component by class, select AC inventory component. And then from here you bind to on inventory change. This means I'm listening for this message to be sent out, and when that message is sent out, do this event, do this function. And that function is going to be this same function, add inventory to list. The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to clear out our list because when the inventory changes, items might be added or removed, so let's just clear it all out. Then we're going to go through each of the inventory items again. So get owning player pawn, get inventory component, and we're grabbing our inventory items. These are the ones that have been spawned, going through each of them and adding them to the item list view. And that's it for the code in inventory selection. This is where it gets to be a little bit more complex. What happens when the items are added to the list view? Over here, we have item list view selected. We have this entry widget class, and this is going to be each row of this list view. I'll caution you, you should not use this plus to create this widget blueprint. You should actually go in and this is just a user widget. So again, widget blueprint and user widget. The reason why you don't want to use the plus is that it's going to give you something called an interface that we don't want. So going back, I just created a widget blueprint to represent each entry, and I called it WEP item entry. In here, I have created how I want the entry to look. So I have this horizontal box. Inside this box, I put in the thumbnail. I put in a button to do something when it's pressed. This is going to be equip. I should actually call it equip button instead of item button. And we have a spacer. By the way, this by default is going to be fill screen, I believe. So it's going to act like if one of these entry widgets were to fill the whole screen, this is what the widget would look like. But it's almost never going to actually fill the whole screen. So we're setting it to desired. This is what the widget wants to be shown as. Again, item thumbnail, this is going to be from the item class, the text from the item class, and I have this spacer here to autofill. This is helpful for this case, where if I want the text to be separated from the image based on how big this scale box is. So if I actually delete this, compile, if I scale the scale box, it's actually not going to do anything. So I'm going to bring it back. And an important thing is it's normally set to auto, but I set it to fill. And in the item thumbnail, I believe by default it's to fill horizontally and vertically, which is going to stretch out the image. I just have it centered. And then one last thing is we need to set the text, so make sure to check off is variable on this item text variable, because that means that it is actually going to show up here under this variables section. Let's talk about the complicated thing. Under here in class settings, we need to do something called implementing an interface. An interface is just a list of empty functions that any other caller can then call into in order for certain functionality to be done. So, say you have a bunch of different actors. Let's say I'm trying to think of an example with different objects. So, say you have a coconut or a rock or an egg. These are all things that can be cracked open. What if you have this in a game? They're probably not all going to be under the same class, but maybe you want them all to have a crack function. Now, if the player wants to crack one of these actors, it's going to need a reference to that actor class. So it's going to have to say BP coconut, I want to crack you. BP rock, crack you. BP egg, crack you. And it's going to have to check, like, is the thing that I want to crack an egg, a coconut, or a rock? If you use interface functions, then you, under class settings, you implement the interface. Let's just say the crackable interface, and it's going to have one function called crack. And now, if I do, I think it's even going to let me do this on the list item. Oh, it doesn't. Let's see if there's a different interface function that I can use. I'm kind of blanking right now on different interface functions, but what it will let you do is just call a function on any actor. Let's see. Let me try one more time. Because usually they're called, there's message, gameplay, tag, yeah, unfortunately I don't actually know the name of any interfaces off the top of my head, so I can't show you, but instead of having to cast to that, to egg, coconut, or rock, you can just call this interface function directly off of it. No, that's not going to work. So I think that this interface is probably defined in C++ and made to be not callable in Blueprint, which is why I can't actually call these functions. But since they're empty functions, whatever we want to actually do these functions, it's going to be defined within the actor. So a coconut, when it cracks, maybe water comes out. When an egg is cracked, egg yolk comes out. And that's all defined within that actor. That's, it's a little bit of a convoluted explanation, but maybe I'll make a video on how interfaces actually work with a proper example. But in order for this list view to detect that the widget is of the proper entry widget class, it needs this user object list entry. If I click plus here, it's actually going to give me a different interface. You just user list entry. This one does work, but it doesn't give you the function on list item object set. So back here, when we add item, the widget is actually not going to know about it at all, unless you use user object list entry interface and then implement this interface function here, which I did. So once an item is set, this is just a this is an object reference, so very base, not even an actor. What we're going to do is we're going to cast it to BP item because we're adding the item itself to the list view. We're going to save off that item in our entry, and then we want to set the text and set the image from the item. So the item's thumbnail is going to become our item's thumbnail, or I should say the widget's thumbnail, and then our item's name is going to be the widget's text. And I have this note here for myself that this item text is only available as a variable because of the checkbox that I checked off up here. And then on pressed, which is an event that comes from the button, I scroll down here and my face is probably in the way, so I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. On clicked or on pressed, you can use either. You click this little plus and it's going to create it for you. So when we press the equip button, we want it to equip the item that you have saved off. So get owning player pawn, get component by class. Like we've been doing before, we get the inventory, we call equip item from the inventory, and we tell it the item to equip. Now, I think that's about everything. At this point, you're probably going to have something that looks pretty similar to this. I have wrapped it in a scale box so that I can actually scale it nicely, because if I do right click and wrap with child, or replace with child, I mean, and I try to scale it, it actually doesn't scale nicely. I think there's probably a different way to do this. There's a few different ways to do everything in Unreal, and I'm not by any means a UMG expert. I would not call myself a UMG novice, to be honest. Anyways, wrapping the list view with this scale box allows me to scale the items properly. And then here in the... So we've created the widget, now we need a way to actually put the widget on the screen. I'm doing this in the player controller. On begin play, we create the widget and I'm saving it off to this inventory widget variable. You can drag off this pin and then do promote to variable. And here I'm using the old input events. You shouldn't use this. You should use the enhanced input or whatever way that you properly add or remove widgets from the screen. You know, there's going to be a ton of different ways. You're probably going to have a dedicated enhanced input action in order to bring up the widget, and then probably like an X button to close down the widget. I'm not setting all that up right now. I'm just showing you this for, this is pretty much a debug to an easy way to bring up and down the widget. I love this node, flip-flop. It means that every time I press 9, it's going to flip-flop between A and B. And by the way, to bring up this 9 event, you can literally just type in 9, and it'll be this keyboard event. This flip-flop node, when I press 9 the first time, it's going to set input mode to game and UI. This means that there's 3 options. There's set input mode to game, UI, game and UI. I have it set to game and UI because if I set it to just UI, I actually can't use 9 anymore to close out of the widget. So this allows me to actually click buttons on the widget since it's also partially in UI mode. Then I need to show the mouse cursor. This is thankfully a variable on the player controller, so it's easy to set. And then I need to actually add the widget to the viewport. That's how we actually see the widget. And then if I press 9 again, it's going to set input mode to game only. We don't need the UI anymore because here we're going to show the mouse cursor to off. We don't want the mouse cursor anymore. And then we're going to remove the widget from our viewport using this node remove from parent. And then again, if I press 9 again, it's going to do this path. Press it again, do the B path. And I think that is about it. I'm going to play it. I press 9. Press gun. I'm clicking gun, which is equipping BP gun. I press katana, which is equipping katana. One more time to go through the loop. I press gun, and that is actually equipping the gun because in the inventory selection widget, I have a list view. It has a list of entry widgets, and this entry widget has our item saved off into it because the inventory selection widget has added the item to it in event construct. So once it actually gets the item, we're setting the thumbnail, the name, and since we already have that reference to that item, we can say when the button is clicked on this entry widget, then we equip item because we are able to get the inventory component from get owning player pawn, and then equip the item with the item that we have saved on this entry widget. And that is how you're able to connect the something that's like in game in an inventory actor to the widget. The most powerful things are this get owning player pawn and then get component by class, because this really allows you to get the actor from pretty much anywhere that the player has control of. So get owning player pawn, there's also just get owning player if you want to get some information from the player controller instead of the player pawn. By the way, I'm using the starter content from Epic's like first person, I think it's first person or first person shooter project. This is not dependent at all on how any of that works. You can implement it in your own project in the way that I just showed it. I think that's about it. Thank you for coming to my tutorial. Let me know in the comments if you need any help with anything else. I can show you something if I didn't explain something clearly. Thank you.